Galactic Council threatens war, human diplomat hardly cares. You will comply or there will be war. The declaration echoed across the vast Galactic Council chamber, bouncing off the towering walls of the assembly hall. The air, thick with the scent of ozone and tension, crackled with unspoken threats. Seated in a circle of hovering platforms, representatives of hundreds of species watched with bated breath. Some looked outraged, others fearful, but all were waiting for a response. At the center of it all, unbothered, utterly unimpressed, sat Ambassador James Carter. He leaned back in his chair, arms lazily draped over the armrests, his expression betraying nothing but mild amusement. "Ha," he said, tilting his head slightly. "War, you say?" The speaker, High Arbiter Zaldar of the Vrellan Dominion, a towering insectoid with chitinous plating and 6 glowing red eyes, bristled. His mandibles clicked in frustration. "You mock us, human. The Council has deliberated, and our decision is final. Your species must submit to the new galactic trade directives, or we will bring you to heel." James exhaled through his nose, glancing at the holographic display before him. The new directives were nothing more than a thinly veiled attempt to shackle Earth's technological exports, forcing humanity into economic dependence. It was the Council's latest attempt at control, one they had tried before, one they had failed at before. The last time they tried to strong-arm humanity, Earth had quietly pulled out of several trade agreements, tanking entire galactic economies overnight. The lesson should have been clear. Apparently it wasn't. James drummed his fingers against the table. "So, let me get this straight," he said casually. "You're saying that if humanity doesn't willingly cripple its own economy to benefit the rest of you, you'll, what, attack us? Blockade Earth? Maybe try another trade embargo?" A murmur spread through the chamber. Some species, particularly those with close trade ties to humanity, suddenly looked uneasy. They remembered the last embargo attempt, and how it had backfired spectacularly. The Vrellan, however, weren't interested in subtleties. Zaldar slammed a clawed hand onto his podium, his armored body vibrating with barely restrained rage. "We will not ask again, human. Compliance or war." James finally leaned forward. His eyes, previously half-lidded with boredom, sharpened. A smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. "You keep using that word," he said. "War." He tapped his chin thoughtfully. "It's funny, people who understand war usually aren't in a hurry to start one." Zaldar hissed, his patience evaporating. "Are you truly so arrogant as to believe humanity could withstand the combined might of the Galactic Council?" The smirk widened into a grin. "Oh, I know we can." Silence. James stood, slowly, deliberately. Every movement carried the weight of something dangerous, something not yet unleashed. His voice, though calm, held an edge that sent a primal shiver through the assembly. "You think war is a game," he said. "That it's about who has the most ships, the biggest fleets, the most guns." He chuckled, shaking his head. "That's adorable." Zaldar recoiled slightly, his confidence flickering. James continued, stepping forward, his eyes scanning the chamber like a predator sizing up its prey. "See, humans? We don't fight like you." His voice lowered, taking on an almost conspiratorial tone. "We don't conquer planets. We don't occupy territory. We don't invade in neat little formations with banners waving." He let that sink in before delivering the next words with surgical precision. "We burn." A hushed ripple of fear spread through the chamber. James took another step. "We burn everything. We cut supply lines. We sabotage infrastructure. We turn your worlds into nightmares before you even realize you're at war." His smile was gone now, replaced with cold, unflinching certainty. "And if you force us to fight, you won't just lose ships. You'll lose civilizations." Zaldar opened his mandibles to retort, but nothing came out. James let the silence hang for a moment before delivering the final blow. "So, tell me, Arbiter, are you absolutely sure you want a war?" The chamber was dead silent. Zaldar's mandibles clicked nervously. The smug confidence he had walked in with was gone. He had expected defiance, maybe even arrogance, but not this. Not cold, calculated certainty. One of the smaller representatives, a timid reptilian from the Seraph Commonwealth, cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should reconsider the trade directive?" James smiled again, this time shark-like. "That," he said smoothly, "is the first intelligent thing I've heard all day." The silence stretched. A suffocating, heavy thing that wrapped around the chamber like a noose. Hundreds of representatives, species of all sizes, from the towering insectoid Vrellan to the gelatinous SV, sat frozen, watching James Carter with something bordering on awe. Or fear. Zaldar, his pride barely holding him together, tried to recover. You speak as though humans are unstoppable. His voice carried an edge, but it lacked the iron certainty it had before. James turned to him with an almost lazy look, tilting his head. Oh, we're very stoppable. The trick is doing it before we decide to return the favor. A low murmur spread through the chamber. Some representatives, particularly those who had once fought humans in minor border skirmishes, shifted uncomfortably. They had learned, painfully, that when humans committed to a fight, there were no half measures. The arbiter's mandibles twitched. His chitinous fingers tapped against the podium as his mind worked furiously. If the council backed down now, humanity would hold all the power. But if they escalated? Enough of this posturing, Zaldar finally snapped, regaining some of his composure. The council does not negotiate under threats. James chuckled, shaking his head. Threats? You threatened us, remember? He gestured vaguely. I'm just explaining why that's a terrible idea. A smaller alien, Ambassador Velk of the Ulari, a species resembling armored crustaceans, leaned forward. Then tell us, human, he rasped, his voice like grinding stone. If war is such a poor idea, what do you propose? James's expression didn't change. Simple, he said, pacing slowly. We walk away. No trade restrictions, no embargoes, no attempts to control us. He paused, letting his next words sink in. Or we walk away completely. A ripple of confusion. Zaldar scoffed. You mean to say humanity would leave the council? James stopped pacing and looked him in the eye. I mean, humanity leaves everything. A hush fell over the room. Velk was the first to break the silence. Elaborate. James crossed his arms. If we walk, we really walk. No trade, no alliances, no fleets to come to your aid when some warlord gets ambitious. His gaze swept across the room, locking onto individual representatives. That means no Terran medical advancements. No human engineers fixing your broken infrastructure. No emergency humanitarian aid when your colonies get hit by a solar flare or a rogue asteroid. He let the implications settle before delivering the killing blow. And, of course, he smiled faintly. No human military intervention. The effect was instant. Species that had once been silent shifted uncomfortably. Some whispered urgently amongst themselves. Others, the ones who had benefited most from human protection, began looking outright panicked. James could already see it playing out in their minds. The Krill Dominion's borders were constantly harassed by pirate fleets. Fleets human patrols had kept at bay. The small agrarian worlds of the Alnari depended heavily on Terran technology to sustain their fragile ecosystems. The SYLT, pacifists by nature, had relied on human forces twice to stop predatory expansionists. If humans left, the entire balance of power would shift overnight. James watched the realization creep across the chamber like a slow, poisonous fog. And then he twisted the knife. You think you're threatening us with war, he said. But here's the funny part. You all rely on us more than you're willing to admit. He shrugged. You want us gone? Fine. Just be damn sure you're ready for what that means. The council was unraveling. Wait, a deep voice rumbled. It belonged to Goratan, a massive, bear-like warlord from the Threxian clans. He had remained silent until now, observing. What if, his fur bristled slightly, what if the council reconsiders? James turned to him, raising an eyebrow. That would be wise. But Zaldar, though shaken, still had venom left. You cannot blackmail the council, human. James sighed, rubbing his temple. Oh, for the love of, this isn't blackmail. It's reality. He spread his arms. If you're too blind to see it, that's your problem. Then, deliberately, he reached down and tapped his holo display. A signal. In the vastness of space, far beyond the council chambers, something moved. The Terran fleets. Ships, silent and waiting, began disengaging from their patrol routes. On trade stations, human vessels began departing in droves. Cargo freighters, research expeditions, even civilian transports, all of them turning away from council space. And then, the final blow. The Terran military channels broadcast a single message. Operation Severance Protocol, initiated. It was not a threat. It was an action. A council representative, a pale-skinned Avori diplomat, turned to her display in horror. You're already pulling out? James smiled, but there was no warmth in it. We're just getting started. The realization hit the Galactic Council like a gravity bomb. As the words Operation Severance Protocol, initiated echoed through the chamber, the representatives reacted in a mix of shock, outrage, and sheer panic. Some scrambled to contact their homeworlds. Others stared at their holo-displays, watching as human vessels, both military and civilian, began their withdrawal. For the first time in centuries, humanity was leaving. Zaldar's mandibles clacked furiously as he slammed a clawed hand onto his console. This is an act of aggression. You cannot simply withdraw from the intergalactic order without consequence. James Carter, still standing at the center of the chaos, gave him a look of exaggerated patience. "We can and we are," he said simply. The Arbiter's metallic voice, so often calm and measured, now held a dangerous edge. "Ambassador Carter, I urge you to reconsider. A disruption of this scale." James cut him off. "The only disruption here is the one your council tried to force on us. We're just removing ourselves from the equation." The silence that followed was different now. It was no longer an offended hush, nor a stubborn refusal to acknowledge reality. It was fear. Velk of the Ilari, his hardened exoskeleton twitching with unease, leaned forward. "You misunderstand, human. It is not just the council that will suffer. Your people, your economies, your colonies will feel this too." James chuckled, shaking his head. "You really think we didn't prepare for this?" His voice carried something new now. Something sharper. Darker. Zaldar scoffed. "Ridiculous. Without access to council-controlled trade lanes, your supply chains will collapse. Your colonies will starve. You may be strong militarily, but you lack the infrastructure to sustain a true isolation." James grinned. A slow, knowing expression. "Oh? You sure about that?" Before Zaldar could respond, James tapped a command into his holo-display. Instantly, the chamber's massive central screen flickered to life. A galactic map appeared, one displaying major trade hubs, hyperlane routes, and key economic dependencies. At first, it looked like any other council-controlled map. But then, the human-controlled sectors changed. The neutral territories bordering human space shifted. Small, independent trade hubs, unaligned colonies, and entire shadow economies that had gone unnoticed by the council. Suddenly, they were all highlighted in Terran blue. A new network emerged. Parallel. Self-sustaining. Entirely separate from the council's control. Zaldar's mandibles hung open slightly as he processed the implications. That's impossible. The logistics alone." James leaned forward. "We started preparing the moment the council began pushing for restrictions on us." His voice was utterly calm. "You see, we're not just a species of warriors. We're not just diplomats or traders. We're problem solvers." He gestured to the map. "We built redundancies. We established shadow markets. We invested in alliances with every independent faction you ignored." He let the weight of those words sink in. "While you were busy trying to box us in, we were quietly removing every lever you thought you had over us." A slow, dreadful realization crept into the room. The council had believed they were the ones holding power over humanity. They had been wrong. Velk's claws tapped anxiously against the polished table. "So that's it? You just leave?" James exhaled as if he were disappointed. "We would have stayed. We wanted to coexist. But you wanted control. And now," he shrugged, "you get to see what the galaxy looks like without us." Zaldar stood abruptly. "This is unacceptable. We cannot allow the Terran species to simply..." But the Arbiter raised a hand. Zaldar froze. The chamber fell into a tense stillness as the Arbiter's eyes, cold, unreadable, settled on James. "And what happens next, Ambassador Carter?" James met his gaze without flinching. "That depends on you." Another long pause. Then, without another word, the Arbiter turned to his own console and issued a priority transmission. The Council's highest security level. A private meeting was being called. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. The Galactic Council chamber was silent. Not the silence of diplomacy or restrained arguments, but the silence of dawning realization. The kind that seeped into bones and made even the most powerful species feel small. The Arbiter, the machine intelligence that had presided over galactic order for centuries, remained motionless, his glowing blue eyes locked onto James Carter. Behind that expressionless metallic face, the vast computational mind of the Arbiter was calculating, assessing, weighing 1,000 possible futures. And not a single one looked good for the Council. Zaldar's mandibles twitched, his voice carrying barely concealed desperation. We can still negotiate." James raised an eyebrow. "Negotiate? Now, after all the threats? The sanctions? The attempts to force humanity into submission?" Zaldar's claws curled into the table. Too late." James didn't raise his voice, but the finality in his words sent a chill through the chamber. Then he tapped his communicator. Omega Protocol, execute. Across the galaxy, the human exodus began. The withdrawal. The Galactic Council worlds watched in horror as humanity vanished. On trade hubs, human corporations shut down overnight. They didn't just cease operations, they erased everything. Data banks wiped, facilities locked down, supply shipments canceled mid-transit. Advanced AI systems self-destructed, leaving council bureaucrats scrambling to rebuild infrastructure they had long taken for granted. On the battlefronts, where humans had once formed the backbone of peacekeeping forces, entire fleets withdrew. Planetary security forces, trained by Terran strategists, found themselves suddenly alone. Pirates and warlords, long kept at bay by the mere presence of human deterrents, pounced. And then there was the technology. Over the years, humanity had uplifted dozens of civilizations, sharing advancements in energy, medicine, and industry. But now, every Terran-made system had a failsafe. Power grids shut down. Medical AI assistants deactivated. Terraforming projects halted mid-cycle. Entire worlds found themselves crippled. And in the void of space, human warships, sleek and silent, slipped into the black, leaving only echoes behind. The galactic panic. The collapse wasn't instant, but it was inevitable. The galactic credit, once the cornerstone of interstellar trade, began to crash within days. Human megacorporations had accounted for nearly 40% of its stability. Now, investors pulled out en masse. On the Council's core worlds, riots broke out. Citizens demanded answers. Demanded to know how the most powerful governing body in the galaxy had driven away its greatest asset. Velk of the Ilari Confederacy paced his quarters, his exoskeleton trembling with rage. "This is madness," he hissed into his communicator. "If the humans do not return, our entire supply network collapses." The reply from his planetary governor was grim. "It's already happening, Chancellor. The grain shipments have stopped. The factories, half were run with human consultants. Our stockpiles will not last a cycle." And it wasn't just Velk's people. Every empire, every corporation, every military force that had once relied on humanity's ingenuity, strength, and trade was now facing the terrifying reality. They had mistaken cooperation for dependency. And now they were alone. The Council's last move. Back in the Council chamber, Zaldar's voice cracked as he spoke. We cannot let this continue." James tilted his head. "What exactly are you going to do? Attack us? You tried to threaten war before and now look at you." The Arbiter spoke at last. His voice carried the weight of a dying empire. "We were arrogant." James blinked. He had not expected that. The Arbiter continued. "For centuries we assumed unity meant domination, that order required control." His glowing eyes flickered slightly. "But we failed to realize that unity is a choice." He paused. Then, in a slow, deliberate tone, he spoke words that no one in the Council's history had ever dared to utter. "Humanity. What will it take for you to return?" Zaldar jerked his head toward the Arbiter in shock. "We cannot." "Silence," the Arbiter commanded. And Zaldar obeyed. James crossed his arms. For the first time since this entire debacle started, he hesitated. He had expected defiance. He had expected anger. He had even expected the Council to collapse entirely. He had not expected surrender. Not like this. The entire chamber now looked at him, not with the disdain and arrogance they had once held, but with desperation. They weren't bargaining from a position of power anymore. They were on their knees. James exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Then, in a measured, careful voice, he spoke. "It's not about deals. It's not about leverage. You all made it very clear that you saw us as a tool. A piece to be moved on a board." He shook his head. "That's not how we work." Pause. Velk swallowed hard. "Then, tell us, how do we fix this?" James studied them. Let them squirm in their own failure. Let them feel the weight of their mistakes. Then finally he gave them their answer. "You don't. The new galactic order. Humanity never returned to the Galactic Council. Not as members. Not as subordinates. Instead they built something new. Independent alliances formed, systems that operated outside the Council's reach. Planets and factions who had once been forced into submission by the old galactic order flocked to humanity's banner. And the Council? It limped along. Its power diminished, its control shattered. Some empires collapsed outright. Others adapted, desperately trying to regain the trust of those they had oppressed. And somewhere, in the depths of human space, James Carter sat in his office, watching reports roll in. He sipped his drink, exhaled slowly and smiled. Because for the first time in history, humanity wasn't part of the council. They were beyond it. Rocket, if you love this HFY story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Rocket, what do you think? Did humanity handle this the right way, or was there another path? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Fire 4 more epic HFY stories. Make sure to hit that notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Fire.